Welcome back to the Old Photo Vault channel. The Reader in the South Room, Hartford, Connecticut, 1912. Mrs. Eleanor Whitcomb read every afternoon by the window, her spine straight, her fingers steady on the page, as if the words were holding her in place. The house had been quiet since her daughter Lillian died there in 1898. A winter illness that never quite left the rooms. Eleanor told visitors the silence was a comfort. What she did not say was that, at dusk, the light near the doorway softened into a pale standing shape, thin as breath on glass. Lillian had been fond of lingering. She once waited hours in that same spot for a carriage that never came. Eleanor never looked up. She had learned that grief behaves best when treated like furniture, acknowledged, dusted, and left where it stands. Yet sometimes, turning a page, she felt a pause behind her, as if someone were reading along, waiting for the end. The Chair by the Hearth, Salem, Massachusetts, 1907. The parlor had been arranged to please Clara Hensley, even after she no longer required pleasing. The chair nearest the hearth was hers, angled slightly toward the window, as if waiting for a remark to arrive late. Clara had died in 1902. 7 months after her husband closed the house for good and left her alone with the furniture she chose. Neighbors said she wasted there, refusing visits, keeping the fire low, listening for footsteps that never crossed the threshold. When the house was reopened for sale, the photographer noticed a pale blur rising from the chair, thin and upright, like warmth lifting from fabric. No one felt afraid. The room remained orderly, calm, respectful. Later owners complained only that the chair could not be moved. It returned each morning to the hearth, facing the window, patient enough to believe someone would finally come home. The Girl by the Birch, Bukovina Forest, Romania, 1911. Anca Ionescu rested her arms behind her head, leaning into the birch as if the tree were listening. The photograph was taken during a village outing, a harmless afternoon meant to mark the end of summer. Anca was 19, newly promised, and already uneasy about leaving the forest paths she knew better than her future home. 3 weeks later, she was found not far from that same tree, fevered and silent after wandering overnight in a sudden storm. Pneumonia, the priest said. An ordinary ending. Years afterward, hikers spoke of a woman-shaped stillness near the birches, never moving, never cold. In old photographs developed long after, a faint second face appears in the bark beside her shoulder, older than Anca, watching patiently. Locals believe the forest kept her, not as punishment, but because she hesitated. Even now, the air there seems paused, as if someone is still deciding whether to go on. The Third Sister, County Kerry, Ireland, 1909. Meyer and Nuala O'Shea stood for the photograph in their mourning veils, hands firm at their waists, faces composed as the family expected. Their younger sister, Bridget, had died the winter before, an illness that began as a cough and ended as a quiet vacancy in the house. The photographer arranged the sisters near the wall where Bridget used to lean, waiting her turn for the mirror. When the plate was developed, a narrow figure appeared between them, faint as breath, her hands folded where a rosary should have been. The sisters said nothing. They knew Bridget's habit of standing too close, of listening into conversations not meant for her. In the years after, the house kept small courtesies. An extra place set, a door left unlatched. Visitors sometimes counted 3 shadows at dusk. Mayer and Nuala never corrected them. They had learned that absence, once noticed, prefers to be acknowledged rather than explained. The Empty Seat, Austin, Texas, 2012. On Friday nights, Lena always chose the middle chair, close enough to touch both friends, close enough to feel included. The bar was loud, the table sticky with spilled drinks, the moment ordinary in the way people trust. When the photo was taken, everyone leaned in and smiled except for the blur behind them, pale and poorly shaped, as if someone had stood too quickly and forgotten to finish arriving. Lena had died the year before in a traffic accident on 6th Street, leaving her phone charged on the counter and a message half-typed. Her friends still met there out of habit, still ordered one extra round they never named. Later, scrolling through the picture, they noticed the shape hovering at the empty seat, the height just right, the posture familiar. It looked less like a ghost than a hesitation. They never deleted the photo. It felt impolite, like leaving before someone finished the story they meant to tell. The man who waited behind him, Amiens, France, 1919. Henri Delacroix stood for the photograph, with his cane planted carefully on the stones. The way he had learned after the war took his left leg below the knee. He wore his best jacket, the one that made him look almost unchanged, and told the photographer he wanted the garden behind him included, proof that things still grew. What he did not mention was Julien Moreau. Julien had been his closest friend in the regiment, a boyhood companion who never learned to walk with fewer parts because he never returned at all. On the morning Julien was killed, Henri swore he felt someone step in behind him, close enough to share his breath, steadying him as the shell burst. When the print was developed, a pale figure lingered just behind Henri's shoulder, half-formed, patient, unfinished. Henri kept the photograph on his mantle until his death, saying only that it was good to know someone still stood watch, especially when you had learned how easily a man could be left alone. The table she leaned on. Asheville, North Carolina, 2008. Margaret Holloway lay across the dining table as if she had misplaced herself. Cheek pressed to the wood, eyes half open in a practiced joke. The photograph was taken after midnight, when laughter thins and furniture begins to feel more attentive than people. Margaret had always liked the table. It was salvaged oak from her grandmother's house, carried through 3 moves and 1 quiet divorce. 2 years later, Margaret died in the same room, an aneurysm that left no time for alarm. The table was not moved. Friends said it would have felt rude. Afterward, the house developed small delays. Chairs scraped an extra second. Reflections lingered under the tabletop, a face briefly visible where no one knelt. On humid nights, the wood warmed without reason. The new owners noticed the mark first, the faint outline of a cheek, returning no matter how often it was polished away, as if the table remembered being leaned on and expected it again. The Watcher on the Bridge, Sinaia, Romania, 1903. Victor Marin sat stiffly for the portrait, hands folded over the hilt of his ceremonial dagger, boots planted as if the ground might move without warning. He had returned from the mountains weeks earlier, thinner, quieter, unwilling to explain why the patrol never came back with him. Officially, an accident. Privately, Victor told his sister that someone followed him home. When the photograph was developed, a second figure appeared behind the balustrade. Tall, indistinct, leaning forward as if mid-step. The photographer blamed smoke, damp air, a flawed plate. Victor did not argue. He recognized the posture. That winter, Victor was found seated in the same chair, perfectly arranged, eyes open, breath gone. No marks, no struggle. The bridge still photographs strangely. Locals say the figure appears only when someone pauses too long, listening for footsteps they already know belong to them. The third dress. Concord, Massachusetts, 1956. Eleanor Brooks and her sister Ruth stood patiently on the lawn, hands folded, waiting for their mother to finish framing the shot. The dresses had been borrowed, carefully pressed, worn only once for a neighbor's wedding that never quite felt like theirs. Between the sisters, there should have been laughter. But the space held something quieter. Their youngest sister, May, had died 2 summers earlier, slipping into the river behind the house while the others practiced standing still for photographs. She had loved pale colors and insisted even then on dressing like the older girls. When the slide was developed, a third figure stood near the garage, faint and unfinished, the hem of her dress dissolving into the grass. Eleanor said nothing. Ruth looked away. Years later, the house was sold. but the driveway remained difficult to photograph. Light bends there, and sometimes a girl appears who seems ready to step forward. If only someone would remember to count her in. The Goat by the Fence, Zagori Mountains, Greece, 1910. Eleni Petrova was taught to milk quickly and look nowhere else. The herd pressed close that morning, bells quiet, breath steaming in the thin air. Her father stood by the fence, counting animals the way one counts days, carefully, never aloud. When the photographer arrived, Eleni kept her hand steady on the pail, aware of the eyes behind the rails. Years earlier, a storm had split the flock, and a kid was born malformed and left overnight by the fence, where custom said such things belonged. By dawn it was gone. No one spoke of it again. On the developed plate, near the woven branches, a goat stands apart. One body, two faces turned opposite ways, horns misaligned, watching both the herd and the path home. Eleni would later say the milk tasted thin that week. The fence was repaired. The count was always off by one, but never twice. The Woman with the Wrong Smile, Sardinia, Italy, 1911. They lined up at the roadside with their jars balanced carefully, back straight, faces set into the patience the day required. Julia Serra stood at the far right, her hand on her hip, veil pulled low against the sun. She had been asked to join only at the last moment, after another woman refused to be photographed so close to the ravine. Julia had lost her husband there 10 years earlier. A fall, they said. No body returned whole. When the photograph came back from the city, the women studied it quietly. Everyone looked as expected. Tired, proud, ordinary. Only Julia's face was wrong. Her mouth stretched wider than bone allowed, teeth too many. The smile belonging to someone practiced in waiting underground. Julia denied it was her. She stopped carrying water soon after and was never seen on the road again. Yet in later prints, the same grin appears. Always at the edge, always where one more woman should have stood. The angel who learned the names. Sedlik Ossuary, Bohemia, 1870. The child angel sits above the skulls with one knee drawn in, as if listening. Josef Kral, a sacristan's son, carved the figure after the winter fever took his sister and 3 cousins in a single week. Bone was plentiful then. Names were not. Joseph worked at night, threading femurs into garlands, setting jaws into obedient curves. He whispered each name he could remember while he worked, afraid the others would be lost to counting. The angel's face, they said, was modeled after his sister's. Soft, unfinished, patient. Visitors noticed it first at dusk. A warmth in the chapel, a pause in the candles. Sometimes the skulls seemed arranged differently by morning, as if corrected. When Joseph died, no record listed his burial place. The angel remains. Guides say it is decorative. Old villagers say it is busy, keeping names where numbers once tried to live. The Woman Who Waits by the Tomb, Oaxaca, Mexico, 1934. Maria Consuelo was buried before dawn. As custom required, her white dress weighed with damp earth and flowers already wilting in the heat. She had died young. Some said of fever, others of a grief that never learned to rest after her fiancé vanished on the road north. Her family placed her near the old crosses, beneath the tree that shed leaves even in summer. Weeks later, villagers began to notice her at night. Not walking, not praying, only standing beside her tomb, thin and pale, one hand lifted as if asking permission to leave. Dogs refused to pass her grave. Candles burned down faster there. A caretaker photographed the cemetery after reports of trespassers. When the image returned, Maria stood clearly between the stones, translucent but composed, eyes turned toward the gate. They say she appears only to those who linger, listening. Not for the dead, but for footsteps that never came back. The aisle that stayed open, Dayton, Ohio, 1954. Evelyn Carter posed with her broom because customers like to see a tidy place kept by a steady hand. The shop smelled of paper bags and oranges. The bell over the door, obedient to touch. Evelyn had bought the store with her husband after the war. When he died suddenly in '52, she kept the hours the same, believing routine could substitute for company. The photograph was meant for the local paper. When it came back, a pale haze clung to the candy rack behind her, shaped like someone standing too close, waiting to be noticed. Evelyn laughed it off. "Steam," she said. "Old lights," but afterward, the bell rang on its own, near closing. Shelves straightened by morning. The narrow aisle by the register refused to be blocked, no matter how displays were set. When Evelyn passed, the next owner swore the store never quite shut. There was always a feeling, mid-aisle, that someone had stepped aside to let you through. The fourth marker, near Kursk, Russia, autumn 1943. The tank had burned itself quiet, its tracks sunk into the field like a thought that would not finish. 3 crosses stood neat and equal, names pressed into pale wood by a hand that still believed order could hold. Sergeant Ivan Petrov counted them each morning before roll call, a habit left over from men who no longer answered. They buried Nikolai late, after the ground softened. There was no wood left for another cross. Ivan placed a helmet at the foot of the mound and told himself it was temporary. When the photograph was developed weeks later, a 4th shape stood between the markers. Faint, upright, hands at its sides, as if waiting to be assigned a name. Ivan said nothing. He knew Nikolai's trouble had always been arriving early and staying close. The field was plowed after the thaw. Farmers say the furrows still bend there, making room for someone who never learned how to leave. The steam that didn't lift. Łódź, Poland. Hannah Lewin bent her head as instructed, fingers clenched around the edge of the bench. The room smelled of metal and damp cloth, and the man with the sprayer avoided her eyes, as if looking might make the moment heavier. Hannah had learned to be light. Quiet steps, quiet thoughts, ever since her mother vanished from the line one morning and did not return. When the photograph was taken, steam filled the air, blooming white and obedient. Later, when the print dried, another face surfaced behind the vapor, pale and watchful, eyes wide with the patience of someone used to waiting. Hannah recognized it at once. It was her mother's expression on the day she was told to stand aside. Hannah survived the winter. She said the room never emptied properly after that day. Steam lingered where names had been called, and sometimes, if you paused too long, you felt a hand rest briefly at your back, steadying you, reminding you not to disappear quietly. The kitchen that kept time. Des Moines, Iowa, 1968. Helen Moore stood by the stove with her hand on her hip, waiting for the bread to cool. She had baked every Wednesday since her marriage, setting the clock 5 minutes fast so the house would feel attentive. Her husband, Charles, used to pass through at that hour, lifting a loaf just to test its weight. He died the previous winter, quietly, between the tick and the chime. When the slide was developed, a thin figure hovered near the oven, no more than steam shaped by habit. The face was faint but familiar, eyes lowered the way Charles looked when he counted minutes instead of words. Helen said nothing. She noticed only that the clock had stopped at 3. After that, the kitchen kept its own schedule. Bread browned evenly without timers. Curtains stirred when no window was open. At exactly 3, warmth gathered near the stove, as if someone had come in to check. Helen continued baking. It felt rude to stop when someone was clearly still keeping time. The stitch that would not close. Dorset Downs, England, 1940s. Clara Whitby knelt in the long grass with her sewing laid across her knees, mending a hem that had torn on the walk up from the lane. The day was mild, the kind that convinces you to stay a little longer than intended. She was 22, recently engaged, practicing the careful habits she believed a future required. The photograph was taken by her brother, meant to capture Clara's patience, her stillness against the slope. What he did not notice was the pale shape beside her, thin as smoke, rising from the grass where their mother had once collapsed during harvest and never stood again. When the plate was developed, Clara stared at it for a long time. She recognized the posture, the way the hands hovered, unsure whether to help or interrupt. Clara finished the hem, but it never held. No matter how often she stitched, the seam loosened, as if something nearby still needed tending first. If these images stayed with you longer than they should, you're not alone. Old photographs don't just record moments. Sometimes they remember them. Tell us in the comments which story unsettled you the most, and what you think still lingers inside these pictures. If you enjoy quiet, unsettling histories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next image that refuses to stay silent.